Welcome everyone on this beautiful day. So this is our Stevens Leadership Portals Leading Through Uncertainty panel series presented by School of Business at Stevens Institute of Technology. Just a word about Stevens Leadership Portal, whose goal, and you can see the background in there, our goal is to provide resources and community for all leadership learners and practitioners. And we address particularly topics at the intersections of leadership, technology, and inclusivity. My name is Wei Zhang. I'm the Richard R. Rossett Chair Professor in Leadership. I'm also the co-founder of Stevens Leadership Portal, and I'll be the moderator of today's session. Let's get started. We have two distinguished panelists today, and one of them is Dennis Lemon, who's the Vice President of Human Resources at the Atlantic Health System. And the other is Kevin Bohan. He's the Chief HR Officer and Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Werner's Co. And also on another note, Kevin is also an alum of our School of Business. So welcome back, Kevin, and welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming and sharing your time and experience with us. So I will start with this question, and I hope this serves as a background for us to understand what you do for your work as well. But could you start by sharing with us one specific challenge you faced during the pandemic that because of the uncertainty or disruption, and how did you handle that challenge?
I'll kind of chime in first, and I think the biggest challenge, and I'm sure Dennis had a similar one with his organization, but the biggest challenge for us was we were deemed an essential organization, so we continued to operate during that time with our frontline manufacturing teams. So the big challenge was, how do you keep people safe? In HR, as a leader, you have a requirement, a due diligence to make sure you're protecting your people and doing things the right way. And usually I go to my toolkit of best practices to be able to do that. Because the COVID was changing so quickly, you really had to stay on top of things. So the challenge was, how do we make sure we were keeping everybody safe in our frontline manufacturing facilities when the information was ever changing and ongoing? So that was really a big challenge for us. And what we did is we leveraged, a wide group of HR leaders and other peer companies, and did lots of group chats as information was being released by the CDC or the WHO to say, let's do everything we can. And we would really, roll things out and suggestions. Even if we weren't sure they were going to help, we were still implementing different tactics to try to make sure that everyone was safe. So that was really the biggest challenge for us going into that, was making sure people were safe as our number one priority.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Dennis, would you like to share one challenge in your experience?
So I think in addition to keeping people safe, which is obviously paramount for us in healthcare, in healthcare in our areas, we had to shut down non-emergent services. And we saw so many different organizations throughout the state of New Jersey and just the New York region, furloughing and laying people off. And our goal from the beginning was to never contribute to unemployment. So we really had to quickly adapt and reskill people in a matter of time, just-in-time trainings, so we could keep them employed and doing work that they've never done before. So we had to make sure they were safe, but then also make sure they had a job to go to each day. So I think that was one of our biggest challenges, was trying to figure out how can we train people so quickly to do something they've never even thought of doing before.
Wow. So how did you handle that challenge?
So, we sort of had to throw a lot of like the previous guidelines out the window, where we would, evaluate how we're going to train and look at the training methodology and look at the content, and really just, it was more boots on the ground and hand-to-hand combat, if you will, saying this is where the gap is in terms of where we need help. Here's who we're going to partner with, and then getting feedback from team members as we were going through this, because it was a very iterative process to make sure that we were listening to people of what was working, what were they getting from that training, and how could we adapt it before the next session the next day. So it was an ongoing, everyday downloading to look at what worked, what didn't work for the day.
Wow. That's impressive. Thank you very much for sharing that. And our next question has to do the theme of today, which is trust. And usually there could be rumors, be anxiety or fear or stress due to the pandemic and due to any kinds of unexpected disruptions. So what are some ways that you build or hold on to the trust between people or among people in your organization? And if you have any specific examples or tools you use, could you share them with us?
Sure. I'll jump in and
Please,
talk
please
about
do.
our experience. So, luckily in 2019, we had implemented a new internal social platform for team members in-house within the organization. And as the pandemic was happening and things were changing, sometimes on an hourly basis from guidelines from the CDC or World Health Organization, our goal the entire time was to be very transparent, communicate the information as it was coming out, be honest when we didn't know what was going on, and tell people if there's a drastic change, what seemed to happen a lot towards around the end of the day. It always felt like the end of the day at 5 o'clock on a Friday, the guidelines would change. But just communicating that, look, it changed. We just got this. We want you to have up-to-date information, and just having open dialogue and open communication. And we leverage that platform to do that, to say, what are you hearing? What do you want to know? And here's what we're hearing. So it wasn't just top-down communication, it was bottom-up communication as well. So people could talk about what their fears and not only what was happening in the work environment, we used it to set up peer-to-peer support in terms of childcare. When school closed down for, it was supposed to be 2 weeks, and it turned into almost a year. It was, people could post on there, I don't have anyone to watch my children, so how can I come in and work in the ICU? But someone else would comment and say, my daughter's home from college, I'll send her over to your house. So it was really pulling the team together and pulling, the AHS family together as well.
Yeah,
Thank
I think
you.
just building off what Dennis said, I think one of the things that resonates really strongly with me is, Dennis, where you talked about, just sharing what information you have and then giving an update maybe at the end of the day that says, hey, that just changed and here's some more information. I think sometimes leaders wait until they have all the information. They want to have all the answers and they want that communication to be perfect. But we were very transparent with people and said, hey, we don't have all the information. We don't have all the answers. We're going to tell you what information we have at the moment. And it may change and it may be the wrong guidance, but we're going to give you what we have and we're going to share that with you. And I think that's, very important. And what was, a very telling thing to us is, some of you may have seen some of the studies that kind of looked at where people trust, right? Do they trust the government? Do they trust the news? Do they trust their employer, their family? And the employer and the trust in the employer was always really high in those different surveys. So for us, we took it very seriously around the type of information we were sharing, the type of messaging we were given. And I think if you look fundamentally at trust, right, and this was during COVID, in order to trust somebody, you have to believe that they have your best interest at heart, right? And hopefully we do that as an employer. But the other thing about trust is you have to have the ability to do what you say. And as an employer, here we are talking about how to stay safe in a COVID environment when you could argue that the company really doesn't have that ability to do that, right? So how do you trust somebody in that case to do that? And the other piece of trust for us was that the organization was still going to be there. So Dennis talked about people can't go to work because of their kids and school and all that. But how do we, help people with that big financial concern that the company is going to be here for the long term, right? We are going to weather this storm. We are going to survive. You're going to have a job, and sharing information with the organization, how we were responding, how we were tightening up, how we were preparing to make sure that they had a job to go to every single day was key. So those were really the foundations and the fundamental building blocks that we wanted to make sure people had, almost going back to the Maslow pyramid, right? Around, hey, you're still going to have your job, and let's kind of build off that from there.
Oh, interesting. Well, thank you for both of your perspectives. I have a follow-up question. So you made it sound really good. It's really good. The strategies of how to communicate and what to communicate are really helpful. But in terms of implementation, so Dennis, you mentioned you have the social network site, the internal ones that you use. How did you make it user? How did you make sure people are using it correctly and not correctly, actually using it and actually believing in the messages they're receiving from channels like that? And what are some helpful tools or helpful ways you have built in encouraging people to use it, as well as building trust in the tool itself and using it as not just official top-down information communication, but really is a tool for people to communicate authentic concerns?
Yeah. So, I mean, luckily we implemented this before the pandemic, and we had a full campaign in terms of around, user adoption, and really wanted to make sure that everyone understood that no matter who you are, especially a lot of our team members, I'll give you an example, don't sit at a desk every day, right? They're taking care of patients. So our campaign really was centered around the idea that not everyone may have a desk. So you may be deskless, but you're not voiceless, and we want to hear from you. And it really came down to getting the leadership team from our CEO down to our frontline managers involved and communicate with people. So someone might put on in one of the groups we call Celebrate, and say, I just had, my child just got married, or I just had a baby. And we would, and by the CEO or one of the senior executives commenting like, congratulations, it's so great to see that. That built the trust, and people understood that people were actually watching what was happening. And when people asked questions during the pandemic or just talked about their concerns, there was someone who's responded, and it wasn't always the answer everyone wanted, but we did respond and talk to people and talk through it. And we're authentic and said, look, I don't have the answer to that, and I'm scared just as much as you are. But by saying that, people understood we were all in it together versus just ignoring it because we were fearful that we weren't going to say the right thing or we didn't have the information.
I see. Thank you very much for the additional details. Thank you, Dennis. Kevin, how about you? I think we have a question from Sasha, who asked about for people, essential workers who had to go back, especially probably at the beginning of the pandemic. And there's differences. Some people get to work from home. Some people have to go to the office and brave the pandemic. So what are some maybe different channels of communication, or how did you communicate during times like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a twofold question, right? So one is, directly, how did we communicate during those times? Unfortunately, we didn't have a slick system in place that we were able to leverage for that population. Obviously, for our office teams, we were able to use email and our intranet. But looking at our frontline manufacturing group, right, and these are the individuals, the men and women that make our products every day, that create our business. With them, we had to pivot a little bit. So we took our text recruiting tool that we had used for recruiting for texting, and we were sending out text messages and sending updates to the group that way, and putting in links for people on their personal phone numbers and communicating that way. So that was one way that we can get a message out to everybody. We did some recorded messages where we would have different leaders do a recording. So if it was a plant manager of a facility, we would have them do the message as opposed to having coming from somebody who was removed. I was very sensitive of myself. Here I am, early days of COVID, right, in the living room in my house, working through in that very, very safe environment. And we've got teams out in the operation, right? And how do you be respectful for that? And that was getting messages from the leaders that were there, going in every day and sharing that. And I think part of Sasha's question was, right, how do you deal with the difference? And you deal with it straight on, right? It is different. There's no question about frontline workers are in there doing that, and non-essential workers are not. But how do you support people differently and embrace the difference? And the needs are different. So what are the things that we could do differently? So we try to embrace the difference and then respond to that as best we can, and acknowledge that it's there.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to pivot a little bit. Actually, there's another audience question, which is talking about trust, especially as organizations become bigger. I think both of your organizations are relatively big. So does trust diminish as the organization becomes bigger, or there's more rules and protocols put in place? And when that happens, how do you continue to build the trust or to maintain the trust?
I mean, I'll chime in. I think as an organization gets larger, I think it is easy for trust to diminish, because sometimes the leaders who are giving those messages are further away from the large group of the organization. And then it becomes very easy for people to talk in the they and them and corporate, because you've got that distance there. So, how do you continue to build trust in that environment? One is, being very open. So when we do our corporate communications calls, we do a Q&A session. So we allow for direct questions right into the groups. We do a lot of what we call skip level type meetings, where we'll have senior executives. And again, nothing fancy that everyone hasn't done before, but they're really effective to take a senior leader, 5 or 10 people from different parts of the organization. And before COVID, we would only do that when we were physically there, right? You'd go to the physical location, get in a room. But now with video, I can pull together groups of new hires across the globe or in the region, very differently. So we find that very effective to do those one-on-one type of communications, and then respond to people. So as people bring up questions, let them know, hey, we heard you. Here's the answer. And Dennis shared this before, right? You may like the answer, you may not like the answer, but we're going to share that back with you. And please continue to give us that feedback or ask those questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pivot now. I think our audience is asking a question regarding one of the interesting things, two interesting things, actually. One is the great resignation. I think we're still living through it. We have seen a lot of that in our university as well. So during times of great resignation, maybe walk us through or share with us what your remote policy, work policy has been, and how did you come to them? Because organizations have been struggling with what kind of policies to develop and how to implement them. Source of that. Could you share with us how your remote work policies have been developed, and maybe they're still evolving?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, our policies are still evolving because we're always adapting and to the times that we're in. Initially when the first wave of COVID hit New Jersey in the spring of 2020, our mantra was, we're all essential. We're in this together. No matter, I'm in human resources. I'm not taking care of a patient, but I went to work every day, and all of our teams did as well. But interestingly enough, we did a survey and we asked our clinicians, do you want people here? And it was overwhelming response was, if you don't need to be here, they didn't want people there because it was just putting them at risk even further than caring for patients. So we quickly adapted, and we have not taken a one-size-fits-all approach because every division, every department is a little bit different in terms of what the needs are of the team. And I think as we keep adapting and keep sort of changing with the new way the world is, we're trying to meet everyone and create sort of a curated experience for them because everyone's situation is different. For example, personally, I don't like to work from home, so I go to work every day. I just like to work in my office, and I like to see the teammates and connect with people. But there's people on my team who don't like that, and there's other people who, on other teams who don't like. So our goal always has been, though, we're really proud and excited about, we've been recognized as a great place to work for 14 years. So we want to keep our culture. So we do have collaboration days where we ask people to come in, but it varies. There is a minimum that you have to come in, but we really leave that up to the leader to have that conversation with their team and come up with the requirements that really fit for that person. And then also make sure that obviously we're still providing extraordinary care to patients.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll kind of just branch off what Dennis had shared, right? So similar here is we're continuing to evolve what that looks like. And we've taken a similar approach of it varies based on the region, based on the office, based on the roles. But we've looked at it from a couple points, right? If you look at, why do people originally go into offices was because they needed the physical materials that were there. We don't need it anymore. You've got your computer, you've got everything at home. So for us, it was looking at what functions need to work together. And one of the fundamental things we said is that there's some roles, HR, finance, IT, have shown very well that they could work remotely and be very successful about that. We've also identified we have other groups, our engineering group, our marketing, our R&D, our innovation teams that really benefit from being together and collaborating, working together. So for those groups, we encourage them and require them to be together more often. But for other groups, very much less so. And it's dependent on our location. We've done some creative things with changing our office footprint to vary for that. And we're also looking at, our offices were built for a day when people were in 5 days a week in offices in cubes. So we're now looking at what does the physical structure look like? And I heard a really cool term the other day. It was in office is the new offsite, right? It's like when you go into the office, you expect something different to happen. What are you doing? What's going on here? You don't want to go into the office and just be on video calls all day.
Right.
Interesting. So Kevin, could you share with us some examples of how have you changed your office in the way that encourages or incorporates different modes of work?
Right. So I'll give one example. In Pennsylvania, we had maybe got just under 200 people working at one location. A lot of the support functions, HR, finance, IT, those groups, and in a very large facility that could house that whole group. And through COVID, we did some surveys, and they said, "Hey, we want to continue to work from home." So we went from a very large office footprint that could house 200 people to a much more modern, smaller footprint that we could only house maybe 50 or 60 people max at a time, but we've made it a collaboration and innovation center. So much more open space, more opportunity to come in and kind of use some hoteling, but we've also created space when people are in to collaborate. So it's not a regular work day, it's spend time with your colleagues. So just a quick thing that we implemented was a block of time in everyone's calendars on Wednesdays from 9 to 12. And we said, okay, everybody, don't schedule any meetings, block that time. And we meant it, but we first did it, we just said it, and then nobody did it. And we're like, well, that's not working. So physically, I went in, Outlook, sent everybody in the company an invite for Wednesdays from 9 to 12. And we said, don't book any schedules then. And we use that time to collaborate. So when we are in the office, it's when people aren't in meetings. So that's a big shift that we've done to have people out and about collaborating as opposed to, doing a regular day-to-day type work.
Interesting. Thank you. And we do have some questions now. I'm going to ask them very soon, but I do have one question, which is remote work. And at the beginning, people's conceptions of remote work is just doing the same work remotely. However, people have been increasingly becoming aware that it really needs a different managerial mindset, because when my manager can't see me, whether I'm working or not, my manager doesn't know whether how much I'm producing or how much I should be producing and things like that. So it seems like there needs to be corresponding changes in managerial practices or managerial mindset when it becomes hybrid or remote mode of work. So what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts about, do you have support for people who are actually transitioning to maybe hybrid or remote work mode, and to encourage that sort of transition of not just technological wise, but also really mindset wise?
Yeah. So when we went through the process of really talking to leaders about moving some of the teams to different work models, we created principles for them to live by. And there's a list of 10 things, but it really comes down to 9, because the first one and the last one are the same, and we have to trust the people that work there. And the goal is to set clear expectations in terms of what do we want the outcome to be. Do we want people to do X? Okay, great. Tell them what needs to get done, when it needs to be done by, and how they do that. It's really up to them, and we have to adapt to that. Not everyone's going to do things the same exact way, and that's okay. But as long as they get the work done, and it doesn't really matter where it is, it could be anywhere. If they want to be in France, they can be there, as long as they're doing their job and that's providing extraordinary care. Then that's the right thing to be doing for the team member as well. So we've done that, and we also created different modules for our leadership team to take within our learning management system in terms of managing a remote workforce, but most importantly, engaging and keep maintaining the great culture. So we've rolled out things like bring your pet to work day. So we have take your child to work day, but everyone bring their pet in the beginning of a meeting, talk about who their pet is, what their pet is, and sort of just gets everyone to connect, even though they're not in the same space any longer. And they couldn't do that before. You couldn't bring a dog or you could bring one, but you couldn't bring 50 dogs into a meeting room.
So thank you, Dennis. You talk about the 9 principles. It's not a pop quiz, but could you share more? I'm just curious. You talked about clear outcomes. What else? Maybe give us one.
Yeah. So definitely make time away from the office a source of energy. So exactly the way Kevin said, we don't want people to go home and then sit on, or go home and then they're doing Zoom meetings all day. And then when they come in for collaborate, they're going to do more Zoom meetings in the office. So what our goal has been is when you come in, you collaborate, but then when you're at home, there also has to be very clear time when you can actually get your work done and you're not sitting in Zoom meetings for 8 to 10 hours a day. So we need to, our philosophy is make time away to also a source of energy for people. So just let them do their jobs. And if they get it done between 9 to 5, great. If they decide they don't want to do it 9 to 5 and they want to be on the beach all day and then get their work done overnight, that's okay too. But we have to adapt and to that. We also, the other thing, one of our other principles is it's an iterative process. So what's working today may not work tomorrow. We have to be very agile and always be open to changing what is working and how it's working. And then challenge the status quo is one. So when we first started this, there were some jobs, they said, well, they can't do things remote. They can't work remotely. So our question was, well, okay, well, maybe the way we have it structured now in the setup, but how do we get to a point where we do have flexibility? And the other, I don't know all of them off the top of my head. I can't remember. I don't have them all memorized. One also is it's not one size fits all. So flexibility means a hybrid work environment for the ISS team, but there might be a team in the finance area who is working on a 4-day work week because that works better for them versus a flexible work environment. So it's definitely, we don't take a one size fits all approach.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very helpful to learn those principles. Kevin, any additional insights you'd like to share?
So I was kind of smiling, but we did very similar things to what Dennis did. We had our own list of kind of pillars, and we did the big shift to, it's outcome based, right? So you're shifting from the work that's being there, it's outcome, and that drives a greater need for focus on goals and objectives and SMART goals and, all the basics, but they become much more critical. And the other piece is the unknown, which is the shift of, I don't think anyone really figured out perfectly yet how to work and motivate in that environment, because, look at myself as a leader, right? Dennis as well, a lot of us on this call, we grew up in an environment where we were in the office every day. We learned how to be successful in that environment, and that has changed a lot of places. So how do you continue to be successful in a different environment? We need to manage differently and manage in a different way. And I was reading an article the other day. They were talking about return to work and return to the office, and they were saying that they had some newer to the workforce individuals, and they were kind of teasing the senior leaders who kept wanting to have happy hours in the office all the time as a way to try to drive people to come in. But they were thinking back to what it used to be like a really cool thing back when you were in the office 5 days a week. But what are those new things that we can really drive and focus on? I mean, part of it is trying to get the flexibility right, as Dennis said, so people get the work done when they can, and it gives them a little bit more flexibility in the workplace.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Wonderful insights. We have some audience question here related to trust. Rob has a sort of a tricky question about transparency. How transparent should you be, especially, for example, salary transparency to building trust? So what are your thoughts on this, Kevin or Dennis?
Yeah, I'll go first, and then I'll kind of throw over there. So I think on compensation, right, it goes back to the trustworthy and the transparency. So it's about, it's scary to have a conversation with somebody about their compensation if you don't know how they're placed versus the market versus their peers, and how that stacks up with their skills, capabilities, and education. So I think the first basic is for organizations to understand their workforce, use market data, understand where people stand. And then they could have that discussion. Hey, Kevin, you know what? You're very well paid for your job, and here's the data why. Or you're below what we've seen the benchmark, and here's what we're going to do that. Or here's what you need to get along in that. Or, we pay on a lower end, but we also try to make that up with the other things we bring to the offering. So we like to say that, compensation is not the only driver. It will drive change for people, but there's so much more there in the workplace that either attracts somebody or retains them beyond just the pure compensation.
Great. Thank you. Dennis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think very similar to Kevin. You have to be transparent, and you have to have the data to back it up. I think, yes, those conversations are uncomfortable, but they're necessary. And that when you are honest with somebody, and it would happen the other day, went through the process with them and said, look, you are paid very competitively for the market. And here's all the other great things that you have and that you are now going to get in this new role that you're in. And, I think just having that, but having that frank conversation and being very honest is key to creating that trust. And then also, I think you can't ever tell people enough all the other great things, right? Salary isn't the only thing. You have to look at what is your total compensation plan, and Another organization may be paying slightly above us, but if you look at holistically and you look at medical and all your dental and all your other things that are your premiums, we're a great organization. So why would you want to sort of only take a very, very myopic look at what is compensation?
Thank you. So it's a sort of an integrated way, transparency. Thank you. My dear colleague Joseph has a question, which relates to flexibility. So we talked about, okay, trust and flexibility, or trust and agility. They seem to go together. Do you see them as going together, or do you think you have to build trust first, and then you can have this flexibility where people are doing their different things, or the reverse, or they have to be developed at the same time? What are your thoughts on this?
I think in the world that we're in, you have to be very agile, and so you're gonna have to do it at the same time, especially if you're a newer leader. Luckily, at Atlantic Health System, we had a great culture of trust already heading into the pandemic. But I think you have to make sure that you're moving as fast as people are looking for. The world is moving so fast, and if we're not meeting people where they are, then they're not going to stay and they're not going to trust us. So I think doing those, making sure that you have a high level of trust and you're very agile, and a very agile organization and agile leadership is really key to has been key to our success, at least. I'll say that.
Yeah. In similar perspective, I mean, I think if before COVID, I would feel very strongly that trust needs to be built first, and then the ability to be agile comes off that. But we did just the opposite, right? During COVID, everybody pivoted quite quickly to a different way of working, where you had to build trust and leverage that agile environment at the same time. So I think they do go hand in hand, and they can reinforce each other from a speed perspective.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. So I have one more question related to the Great Resignation. So as you said, Kevin, there's a lot of different things organizations are doing, like parties and food and things to keep people, to retain their employees. And you mentioned being flexible itself is a big attractor. Anything else you think that have helped too, or you think would help to retain employees during the current environment?
Yeah, I think one is the cliche, but it goes back to the basics of understanding the individual and what they want to do, right? What motivates them? What do they get most enjoyment from? For some people, it's, hey, I want to learn more things and I want to learn more on the job. Other people, flexibility is the most important thing for them. So I think to retain people, it's understanding what levers are important to different people. And that depends on where somebody is in their lifestyle, right? Somebody who's newer to the job market might be more interested in learning and development opportunities, whereas somebody who's just starting a family may really cherish that ability to take off for an hour or two in the middle of the day to get some work done. So those are some of the core pieces I think have a big impact on that aspect. And just talking to people about what they want and what they need is the key piece, because at the end of the day, it's still managers that I think that retain people in the organization.
Thank you. Dennis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think very similar. I think we have to create curated experiences for everyone. It's not a one size fits all. For many years, we had one benefits plan, and we can't do that any longer because everyone wants something different. And I think, as you look at, I look at like the work that we do, and as we support team members as sort of like food. So I look at it as like a cake, right? So we could have all the parties in the world. That's all the icing on the cake. But if we aren't we're not taking care of people and have like a holistic approach to their well-being, whether it's, their mental, their physical, and their health and welfare, and their emotional well-being, and in the way that they want, and then also their professional growth and development, that's the cake. And if we don't have those foundational things in place, and we're not really doing well with those, all the other stuff doesn't matter. But with that being said, we still do a lot of fun activities and do a lot of great things. But if we didn't have those other things in place, it wouldn't even matter.
Excellent. Let me follow up this with a specific case. It's a real case, actually, somebody sent in. So this person is leading a 6-people organization, technology, data science sort of organization. And I think he has been there for like 3 months, and 12 team members out of the 60 have resigned because he was trying to change the way they work and trying to be more efficient and having higher expectations. So they left. but he's not quite reflecting on his own style. He said, well, they just dislike my high expectations, but I don't want to lower my expectations. What do you do? So what are some advice for this leader?
So I would say, I would have a conversation with the team that's still there and say, what's working, what's not working, and let's talk through it. Everyone, as being a leader, you can have the best ideas in the world, at least in my opinion. I think I have great ideas, but when I talk to the team, I value their feedback and I actually listen to them. So I'll say, why don't we try this? And they'll say, well, it's not going to work because of X, Y, Z, but would you be open to this? And you have to be open to adapting the way you're leading and sort of meet them and where they are, because the employer-employee relationship has been completely turned around. So right now we have to do everything we can to adapt ourselves to meet people and the team where they are and what they need out of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, no, again, very similar kind of feedback on my end, right? One first would be let's look at those individuals that left. Are they considered top talent? Because those are usually the people that leave the quickest. So understanding, who left and where do they fit in from a skill set and requirement for the business to be successful. And then, as Dennis said, right, it's whether it's a 360, whether it's a new leader assimilation type exercise, but really have to get feedback from that team as quickly as possible. Maybe having somebody come in from HR or a consultant come in and help facilitate that discussion, but do it in a safe environment where people can give that feedback, right? Because that leader really needs to understand what the message they're giving to people and individuals, and kind of guess that. And with a new leader, you are going to see some change, right? You have different styles, different expectations. So you're going to see some turnover, but you want to make sure that it's manageable and you're understanding the reasons why and who's leaving is not having a negative impact on your business's performance.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So this leader's own explanation of the situation is because of the high expectation theme may not be the full story. It's just you needed to dig in and find out really why, what are all the factors, and then make decisions or change course or deploying different strategies to deal with them. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So my next question will be leadership skills. So there's a lot of leadership skills training courses and degree programs, including something we have as well. So if you can do something to change those leadership programs, so people, the leaders we develop become better versed in terms of dealing with uncertainties, how would you change those programs? What could make them better to develop these agile leaders who are very good at building trust in people, in their teams and organizations?
I think a really interesting way to do that would be if it's for certain leaders and organization, right? Bringing in individuals that are the impact or impacted by those decisions. So if it's a senior level group in the organization, bringing in 4 or 5 people that are, 5 levels down in the organization and say, hey, you rolled out this policy or you gave this message. Here's what it meant to me as an individual member of your team. I think that would really help people to understand and resonate more with how their message is landing and the responsibility that leaders have to make sure their messages are coming across the right way. So I would increase the communication across all levels and maybe bring in some live examples of people to share their feedback.
Thank you. So let me follow up, Kevin. So communications, what kind of communications? Any specific examples or, for example, scenarios? Could you think of a scenario where communication can be better done by leaders?
I was thinking just kind of if you look at the it's the undercover boss type thing, right? Which is very staged, type TV show, but you do have those leaders that, all of us, right, as leaders, we're doing the best we can. We're making the best decisions we can, but we're not there on the front line. And it's so critical to understand from individuals, hey, Kevin, you came up with this maybe great idea for me in my office, but where it lands out to the sales team or the performance team in a very different way. So it's just getting those frontline discussions and making people feel comfortable and trusting them. And you do that through when somebody gives you feedback, it's a nugget of gold, right? So how do you take that, let other people know, hey, we got this feedback, or hey, we're rolling out or we're changing this policy because I've had people that have reached out to us, their managers, that said this wasn't working and now we're going to change this. or going back to somebody that gave you feedback and say, hey, I know you understand you're not happy with our policy, but let me just explain to you a little bit about why we have the policy that way and why we're not going to change it. So that's, to me, it becomes a snowball, right? The more you do that, the more you're going to get that feedback from people, and they see that, you know what? You can ask a question on a big conference call and nobody's going to get fired after that, right? How do you foster that type of environment? And it's a cultural piece because some people are afraid to ask questions.
Excellent. So it's not just communication, but it's how to get other people how to get ourselves understood by others, right? It's really with recipient's perspective. Thank you. Thank you. Dennis, would you like to add in terms of how do we develop leadership skills through any kinds of programs to get them to be more agile and flexible to deal with uncertainties?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about the pandemic, right, if we're trying to look at what good came out of this, really has been the sense that people who have the ability to increase their level of agility have really been highlighted and done a great job. And I think it's ongoing and very regular process. So, pre-pandemic, we had a very formal leadership development process, and it was, you went on this track and you did it at this time, and here's what happened. And we've had to adapt. So, we're using different tools now and in very short micro learnings, and it's sort of reiterated every single week. So every Tuesday, everyone gets a learning track. And sometimes it's some games, sometimes it's little videos, and it's all individualized for those leaders. So, but everyone does have agility, and two main things, agility and engagement, are very important for us. So looking at that, and then I think we one of the things that we sort of had to modify was our feedback sessions. So all of our senior leaders have monthly, food for thought sessions, or little feedback sessions with small groups of team members. So even our CEO will have his food for thought sessions and talk to 10 people about what's working. How did you like this benefit that was rolled out? How did you feel when you heard this communication? And he truly understands and takes that back and talks to the team. And then we go back and do a "we heard you" message. Okay, here's what you said, here's what we found out, and keep that process going. And we do that throughout the system with all different levels of leaders. So that also builds trust, because people know we're actually listening to what their question, comments, or concerns are.
That's excellent advice. So what if in some situations you have heard and have processed them, but you can't change the way that people would like you to change? How do you get back to them? How do you get back to them in situations like that?
So the example, I mean, it's a minor thing, and I find it very funny. But one of the times in one of the sessions, someone said there wasn't enough chicken in the chicken noodle soup in our cafeteria. So we're like, okay, well, thanks for the info. Go back. We talked to the chef. They explained to us how much chicken's in there. There's a lot of chicken, and it didn't really make sense to add more because it would just be chicken. It wouldn't be have all the other ingredients. And I joke about it, but at the same time, I went back and we talked to the person and said, here's what you said, right? And I heard you. I understand. I even looked into it for you. And here's why we put this amount of chicken in. If you want to talk to the chef, here's what you can do. But going back to the person, it's really important to do that, because then you're closing the loop with them, and it goes back to that's building trust, because that was really important to that person. It was important enough for them to bring it up. So I have to make sure it's a priority for me to get back to them, and so that team member knows that they're a priority for me.
So that's very nice. That's very nice. But how do you prioritize? I imagine if you get too many requests like that, you don't have that much time or energy to deal with all of them. How do you prioritize whose or what kind of feedback you pay attention to, and at this time, maybe later take care of others? Do you have a system to decide on the priorities that you focus on based on these feedback?
Yeah, it depends on the forum, right? So the chicken noodle soup came up in one of our food for thought sessions. There was 10 people, so I got back to all 10. But we do use our internal systems. So I use our internal social platform. So people comment all the time on it. And the great thing is we're empowering our teams So I don't have to respond to everyone. Someone on my team will see it. But more importantly, we're crowdsourcing information and comments from, or even just peer to peer. So, if there's a rumor that, I don't know, I'm trying to think of one of the rumors, but there's a rumor we're going to sell one of the medical centers, and which isn't going to happen, but someone will post that up there, and 90% of the time, a leader doesn't even need to respond because a colleague's already saying, well, that's not true, and here's why. And I just went to this forum. So people are communicating with each other, and it's building trust with them. But if someone tags me in something, although it may not be a priority for me that day or that moment because I'm in something else, I have to make sure at the end of the day I go through and really look at what did everyone ask of me, and I have to make sure I get back to them. And if I can't do it right then, I could even, if it takes some time, I could say I can't get to this right now, but tell them that. But I'll get back to you by the end of the week. And people respect that if you just tell them that. If you ignore them, that's when you erode trust, and the culture doesn't remain as great as it is.
Excellent. So I would just want to point it out that you already have a high level of trust in your organization, because your organization has been recognized as Fortune's 100 Great Places to Work 13 years in a row. Congratulations.
14. We found out on Monday. We made it 14. So
14 years. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a big achievement. So let's imagine, I'm throwing you some difficult questions, but I have experience with some organizations who have lower levels of trust, and if they have also implement, let's say they want to learn from your model and they want to implement some social platforms like yours, there might be full of complaints and things. And so if you are going to advise an organization like that who doesn't yet have a high level of trust, they may have either silence on the social platform or they have lots of complaints, how should they go about it? What's your advice for them?
So we lived through it. So, Atlantic Health System wasn't created overnight. So we've acquired or merged with other organizations, and every time we've merged, there have been some growing pains and some issues. And so I think the best example I have is one of our medical centers that joined in 2014, had the lowest level of engagement, lowest level of trust. And we went in and right after the new year, and we formulated a plan, and it really comes down to basic things. Listen to people, communicate what you've heard from them, and just do what you say you're going to do. It's really not that hard to create trust if you just listen to people and meet them where they are. And we've implemented some very basic things and sort of used our playbook that worked in other organizations and adapted it, because every culture is a little different within our company. But it quickly turned around, and we made sure we had the right leaders in place, who also are people who listen and understand where people are coming from and are able to build relationships. We moved away from, if you're a great nurse, that means you're going to be a great nurse manager. That's not true. You have to be a great people leader in order to be a great manager. You have to be competent clinically, so we don't want anyone who can't do nursing skills. But at the same time, we know that the biggest thing we're looking for is somebody who has that ability to build relationships, connect with people, and then lead them. So I think it comes down to just listen first, and you're not going to have all the answers, but you just have to hear what people say.
Thank you, Dennis. Kevin, would you like to weigh in a little bit on this too? I know your organization already also has a high level of trust. So if you are to advise an organization that has a lower level of trust, that people don't really share, or they share complaints more than other things, what's your advice for them?
It goes back to just listening, right? Listen to what are people saying? What are people not saying, right? So if you're not getting complaints, if you're not getting feedback on things, that in itself is a very strong sign, right? That there's something there. So really listening to where people are at, making sure you've got a comfortable environment. Look on, what are the Glassdoor feedback from your organization? These are people that are leaving, but it still can give you a telltale sign. Are you doing an engagement survey to get a deep dive in your organization? Are you doing some pulse surveys with different groups to try to get some feedback? What are the themes right, that are coming up from your skip level meetings or your one-to-one discussions with people? What are those type of things? And just listening to what people are saying, and then try to, as Dennis said, right, do what you say you're going to do. So that's how you really quickly erode trust, is by not following through on what you're going to do, or not addressing the issues. Or the worst thing you could do is take the feedback and then not do anything with it, right? Not get back to somebody.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Everything from the pandemic going forward, what would you do differently, or what would you maybe strengthen or continue doing or doing more of in terms of elevating trust, agility, and resilience in your organization? Any learning from the pandemic that you'd like to hold on to going forward?
I think the thing that jumps in my mind is to treat people differently is okay at times. I think, from an HR perspective, we've always tried so hard to treat everybody the same policy, same everything. But what we learned from the pandemic is that different people, different groups, where they're at, different roles, need to be treated differently. And as long as you could articulate why you're treating somebody differently, or why the benefits different for different individuals, you can do that in a transparent way and be transparent about it. Hey, these are the teams that get to work from home. These are the teams that don't get to work from home. And looking at the benefits as a way that maybe support people differently, because we saw that very much with, supporting parents, people who had young kids, people who are going to work every day. In one of our manufacturing facilities, we had, families that had shifted work schedules amongst themselves so that they could better support their families outside as well. So it's really just listening to people and saying it's okay to do things differently, but you have to be transparent about it. Otherwise, people will make it mean something. So you have to be really clear why you're doing it and how you're doing it.
Thank you, Kevin. Dennis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, the agility that came with the pandemic, I would love to keep the level of agility that we have and not go back in any way, and maybe even increase it, because I think, at least for Atlantic Health System, and I think healthcare in general, it really sort of hit the fast forward button for us about 5 years. We probably would have gotten to this point, but it made it, instead of being 5 years, it took about 5 weeks. And we need to keep that momentum going, because the world's changing, and if we don't change it, we're going to get left behind. So I think that's what I would do.
Excellent. Thank you both so much, Kevin and Dennis, for a wonderful session